So this panel is titled The Successful Transformation of Infrastructure and Security Strategies, Navigating 25-Point Reform in a Climate of Shrinking Budgets. I'm going to go ahead and just briefly introduce each of the speakers. I'm going to then give each of them a chance to give a short 2-minute overview as to who they are and what their organizations do, so you're all aware of that, and then we'll get into a great Q&A. We will have time for some questions from the audience at the end, so please jot them down if you have any. To my right, we have Steve Antone, who's the VP of Federal Solutions at Lumention Security. My far right, I should say. To my immediate right, we have Paul Barter, the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Extenet Systems. To my left, we have Joe Huell, who's the Lead Technical Architect and AT&T CTO for the AT&T Government Solutions. And to my far left, we have Roy Stephan, who is the Vice President of Technology Solutions at Intelligent Decisions. So what I'm going to do is start at my far right with Steve here. And Steve, if you can give a 2-minute overview as to what your background is and what your company does, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, so Steve Antone with Lumention. I've been in the business, in the government business, for about 15 years now, and been with Lumention for, I guess, almost 8. So I've seen the company grow up quite a bit over the last several years. And really what Lumention's all about is endpoint security. So, we do patch management, vulnerability assessment, configuration management, FDCC compliance, a laundry list of things from a suite perspective. One of the things that's different about Lumention is really the methodology we use from a security standpoint. And instead of traditional reactive technology like antivirus, anti-spam, the reactive technologies, we're really more of a proactive technology and have adopted a capability around application whitelisting. So taking what you know about in your environment and approving those applications and those devices for use, and then denying everything else by default. So a much different model than the reactive or the antivirus type of model, and we've had some really good success with our new platform over the last year. So that's really, in a nutshell, what Lumention is and what we do.
Terrific, thank you. Paul?
Hello, I'm Paul Barter with Extenet Systems. We are an indoor and outdoor cell phone network owner, operator, and our clients typically are the wireless service providers. We extend coverage and networks for the carriers in hard-to-reach places. So inside buildings, in suburbs that don't want to have cell towers built near them are the types of networks that we typically build. What we're seeing is a move by the wireless service providers from voice networks to data networks. And we think there's a great position that Extenet can play and a part of the equation that we can create as a third-party neutral host for wireless service providers to come into the government facilities on one shared network infrastructure.
All right, thank you, Paul. Joe?
Yeah, I'm Joe Huell. I work for AT&T. Been with AT&T about 25 years. It says here Government Solutions. AT&T is a really big company. I actually work for in corporate headquarters doing some planning for our network and cloud services. My background has been on network services. What we're doing with our cloud is trying to apply some of the technologies, some of the learning, some of the understandings of our network services, voice and data network services, and apply those to cloud as we bring those to market.
Terrific. And Roy?
Hello, my name is Roy Stephan. I'm Vice President of Technology Solutions for Intelligent Decisions. I like this panel because we have a wide representative from the marketplace here. We have a vendor, we have two different networking cloud companies, and I'm with Intelligent Decisions, which is an IT solutions provider. So we're a systems integrator as well as a value-added reseller that works on bringing these solutions together and focusing them primarily for the federal marketplace. I've been with the company for 10 years, helping build out ID Labs and the Innovative Solutions Group there, as well as 5 different core areas in cybersecurity, cloud solutions, application development, simulation and training, and the 5th area is networking.
Terrific. To get things started, I just want to ask one question to each of you, which is something I got asked very frequently from the government folks I was doing research with, and that was a curiosity to know how the 25 Points IT reform plan has impacted your approach to business, and secondly, and also the fact that there was a budget crisis that came about when this plan was implemented. How has that really impacted you? And we can go ahead and start with you and go the other way. Roy?
Okay, sure. Well, I think that 25-point plan actually plays well into the budget crisis. It's a good response to the budget crisis. From our perspective, we see data center consolidation, virtualization as a way for people to reduce their costs, their day-to-day costs of running their data centers. And I think that plays well into our solutions-oriented approach. We tend to focus on private cloud enablement, so we're bringing solutions that were originally developed by the Googles and Amazons of the world, as well as some of the other cloud providers, and bringing those abstractions and those virtualizations and that high level of scalability into the data center from a private cloud perspective. So this is really good for our business, I think, because of our focus on data centers, data center consolidation around our cloud practice and our networking practice. So it's actually, I think it's a good thing for the government, and I think it's a good way to get a return on investment that can help with the budget crisis.
Terrific. Joe?
Yeah, continuing on with the cloud story, the first half a dozen initiatives are associated with cloud out of those 25. And what we've done is we've accelerated some of our movement towards development in the cloud. Yes, private cloud, but the economies, from our point of view, really kick in when there's a public cloud infrastructure, like in the network. The economies kicked in as we started to share the networking infrastructure among multiple entities. There are ways to be able to do a public cloud, but keep things separated. And I really appreciate the conversation we had in the boardroom today. The various boardroom sessions got very active discussion, and I'd like to continue on those discussions. So if there were any questions left over, when we get to question and answer, I hope they get surfaced today.
Absolutely. All right, Paul?
So I'm not an expert on the 25-point plan, but I've read it now 3 or 4 times, and I find it to be very optimistic and hopeful. And I do. I mean that with a great deal of respect and sincerity. I was strongly encouraged by the President's leadership on a number of technology fronts. I agree that we're still a little behind where we could be and should be. I think the 25-point reform lays out a framework where we can all articulate to executive management that we're being consistent with what our President is asking us to do. The couple of points that I really stress, and back to my management structure in private industry, it's never easy to go to private industry and say to them, we know we've got a good business case for commercial enterprise, but what we want to do is take a similar story to the federal government because we think they want to listen. And so what I was really encouraged by mostly in the 25-point plan are the areas that sort of express to private industry, we're willing to listen to what you're doing and your best practices in private industry and try some of those things, even on a pilot basis in government, and see what happens. And I think that opportunity it doesn't exist very often. And so it's important that each of us really kind of think about how can I use this opportunity to really try to move some things forward that I believe in passionately. And I got to tell you, I believe passionately in wireless. I believe passionately in mobility. I think a phone that's on your hip is much better than a phone at your desk that you're not at 75% of the time. And so I believe firmly that there are some opportunities with this BlackBerry president, as he's been called in certain circles, and with this administration to not just change and reform IT, but also change and reform procurement, change and reform input from industry, change and reform a number of initiatives that we may not get another chance at for a long time. And so I'm really encouraged and excited about the opportunity and glad that that ExteNet has chosen, like Joe just mentioned, to accelerate and really move hard into an area where we think there's a great opportunity.
Well, if I'm being completely honest, I've learned more about the 25-point plan in the last day and a half than I have in the last 8 months. Certainly when it came out several months ago, read through it, looked at it, and I think some of the interesting things from our perspective is aligning the IT budget cycle and the technology cycles together, because a lot of times you go out and you see a customer that really needs technology, whether it's mine or my competitors, but the deal never gets done because of some budget cycle or something that's out of their control. But frankly, it really hasn't affected our business one way or the other. I mean, if I'm being completely blunt, I see a lot of activity. I mean, just in the last day and a half, I saw the Department of State's got a lot of action going on, and Bob at DOE was looking, and some of the actions and the activities around it. So I see that there's movement forward on it, which I think is good news, and they're requiring some rapid results and so forth. It just hasn't trickled down to where it's really affected our business, but we're keeping our eye on it.
Awesome. With that, we're going to go ahead. I've have some questions and some key areas that I think are most relevant to the other discussions we're having over the next couple days. The first one is about the role of the CIO, and Steve, I'm going to ask this one to you. I'm just wondering, what your thoughts are on the role of the CIO, if you think it's changed over the past few years, where it's at now, and potentially where it's going to go in the future.
Sure. So, interesting, the role of the CIO, the plan talks about that and says, the role of the CIO should be more focused on portfolio management as opposed to policy, and I do agree with that. But I think there's some larger issues to be discussed, and over the last several years, I think that the position or the role of the CIO has gained a lot of visibility and a lot of control. And look at the VA, for example. I mean, 10 years ago, the VA was very fragmented. There was purchases being done at the field level. It was disjointed. It was hard for them to get, visibility from an enterprise perspective. And, we all heard Dr. Tibbetts yesterday talk about, the control that they have. I think there's a price with that, though. And, there's some issues around, having that control is good, in my opinion, because it's less people I got to go talk to, right? But it also creates an issue with the field. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times I think the role of the CIO is a sales job. You've got to go out and get buy-in from not only your leadership, but the field. Because large IT projects, you can't just jam stuff down people's throats. In some cases, it just has to happen. But in most cases, if you want something to be successful, I think it's important that the CIOs are looking up and down the organization to make sure that there's that commitment and there's the buy-in from the field, because I've seen a lot of things fail, frankly, in the field because people are, they're getting it jammed down their throat. So I like where the role of the CIO is today. They've gained more visibility and control. And I think some of the successful CIOs out there are able to really sell up and down the organization to get field buy-in as well as leadership buy-in.
Great. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
The CIO is a challenging role in most compliance conversations. But what I was encouraged by on a couple of fronts were folks that stood up here and said, look, we sort of dispense with the whole notion of compliance, and really we're focused on the mission and trying to accomplish efficiencies through information sharing, knowledge capture, making sure that we're speaking to our customer, who in this instance might be the agency. That's a changing role. Okay, so as people sort of exhibit that leadership, I think the strength that comes with that is not so much that you have the information, but the strength of the organization is improved because you're letting the people who are doing the work access the information. And so for me, I'm encouraged by it.
That's a great point. Next, I want to get into a few questions surrounding infrastructure, which is obviously a key component to the 25-point reform plan that Vivek put out. Paul, first up for you. As a vendor, are you seeing places where you've been successful with infrastructure as a service? I'm assuming you'll talk about mobility, call me crazy, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and then anyone else has any comments.
Okay, so successful by my sales manager's definition is I've closed a deal. So, we've had limited success. I'll use that term. Infrastructure as a service is not a new concept in the commercial sector. It's not really even a new concept for government. It goes through cycles, it seems like, where for a while we talk about things that are over 3 or 5 and 10 year buybacks, quote unquote. It could be called a lease or other terms. But infrastructure for us is an asset. And so the question is, if you're going to outsource the operation of a mobile network, for example, well, that's an infrastructure that can be turned into a service. We took a product into GSA, Federal Acquisition Services, and we were able to actually negotiate a contract based on performance metrics for mobility. And our schedule is a set of services for infrastructure that Extenet owns. So in that regard, with respect to the acquisition side, they were comfortable with this model. So we own an asset inside of a government facility that we lease to the wireless service providers to reduce the cost to the government, because it's a shared infrastructure, and there's various stakeholders on that infrastructure. We think that's an immensely fair way to price it, that each of the wireless service providers that's riding on it pays a little bit, not as much as they would if they did their own, we're hoping, because that would market it better. And the government pays a little bit, because the government's really getting the most benefit out of it. So infrastructure as a service is a good concept. Our challenges really relate more to the procurement offices who want to just own and buy. And so when we go and have these conversations about, well, we'll give you that price, but will you take an alternative price to do this for about maybe a fourth or a third of that budget for this year, and do it on an operational cost? And I'll say that we've heard some people come back, and we're actually making some progress on some RFPs when we're soliciting at the input phase during the requirements gathering phase. And I'm encouraged, again, I'm optimistic that over time that'll become more and more widely used, because it just makes a lot of sense.
Great.
Yeah, it's still young. Infrastructure as a service is still relatively young. There are hurdles, purchasing hurdles, and there's just even a mind frame hurdle. What we thought would be a big advantage, that you can expense something that you just have to get capital dollars for, sometimes ends up being a disadvantage, because people have budgeted the capital dollars and they can't recolor the money. So it's kind of hard to go back and make something which should be a financially good thing to do, to go ahead and do that. So I think it's going to take a while for us to be thinking about, yeah, I can expense this, yeah, it's a right concept, and be able to actually get the wheels going and get the momentum going the right way.
Good point. Yeah.
If I can just add a little bit onto that as well. From our perspective, we see it as a terrific opportunity for people to perform sort of in-place upgrades for their infrastructure. If you have a continuing resolution type of a situation where you have operating budget for your existing infrastructure, but your existing infrastructure is outdated and insufficient for your needs, you may be able to do an infrastructure as a service. You can think of it as a lease. You can think of it as a lot of different financial arrangements that he outlined a moment ago. But you may be able to acquire the new infrastructure, the new capabilities, the new scalability by taking that operating budget from your legacy systems and moving to the new system under an infrastructure as a service model, rather than trying to find new CapEx under a continuing resolution, where you may not be able to find the CapEx to actually purchase that infrastructure outright, as you may have in the past.
Great. Roy, you mentioned earlier, you mentioned some about the work you do in cloud. I know that there has been talk at past council meetings about the difference between public, private, hybrid clouds, and Vivek specifically talks about leveraging public clouds. I'm wondering how you define that, if you can, some audience members still may not be clear on that, and what your thoughts are.
Okay, I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace about the definition of clouds. There's a lot of different cloud definitions going out there. I don't know who sat in the terrific discussion that Peter Mell gave earlier this afternoon on clouds. I'm not going to go through the depth of a definition of clouds that he went through, but I definitely encourage you to check out the NIST documents that he has written on cloud. There's some very good detailed definitions there, but at a very high level, right, a public cloud is hosted. It's a hosted facility that you're connecting to remotely, and they're gaining the scalability of enormous economies of scale because they're aggregating those servers and those systems across many, many customers, maybe hundreds or thousands of different customers. Whereas a private cloud, it's internal. It's really sort of the next generation of the data center. It's just perhaps even a consolidated data center compared to what you've had in the past, leveraging some of those virtualization and those abstraction techniques that were developed in those large, super scalable public clouds, but leveraging them for your own internal use. It doesn't have the same economies of scale. There are some economies of scale there, depending on the size of your agency or your division. But the real benefit of that is the small amount of scale increase that you get by using those virtualization technologies and those cloud technologies at the data center level, and also the ability to maintain control from a privacy and a security perspective. A lot of people have pieces of information that they want to keep control over. The one that I find most interesting and most challenging is the hybrid cloud model, where you're actually taking your data and splitting it between the public cloud and the private cloud, where you might even be splitting a particular application or one particular subset of data partially in the private cloud, partially in the public cloud. I think there's a terrific growth in this area. There's a lot of headroom in the marketplace for new solutions to really explore the trade-offs there between public and private clouds. And that's an area where I think the next year, the next 3 years, there's going to be a lot of advancement in how you splice that data and the different types of hybrid clouds that can be developed.
Absolutely. And, dovetailing off of that, as we talk about what types of clouds we can use, we have to think about what the data is and how we make decisions based on where we're going to host that data. So, Joel, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that? What's good evaluation methodologies or best practices?
Yeah, so we had some great discussions about there's certain types of data, certain types of applications you just would not put in the cloud. With public cloud and even some private cloud attributes, okay, yeah, you get virtualization, but you're still want to keep that pretty locked up. There's other data that you put out in the public cloud because it's going to end up going out into the internet anyway. But there's a large chunk of data that might be sensitive, might be proprietary, might be something that you want to keep separate, and you want the economies of a public cloud, but you don't want to have to go through the internet or put it on the internet. And I understand NIST did not define this, but there is a concept of a virtual private cloud, where it has certain characteristics of a public cloud, like the economies of a shared infrastructure, but it has certain characteristics of a private cloud, like you're not on the internet, and there are ways to access it only through private networking infrastructures. And if we can find that right in between and find the right data to put on it and build the trust that's associated with it, I think that's going to end up being a sweet spot where you get the economies that's going to be relatively easy to go to, but yet you get your level of comfort that it's not on the internet, it is not accessible through the internet, and it's almost like having compute resources in your own private infrastructure.
Wonderful. And Roy, what about you? What are your thoughts on the public cloud? I know you have some good ideas there.
Well, I think one of the challenges that people get into is, how do I know which pieces of data are sensitive and should be kept on my private cloud, and which pieces should I put out into the public cloud in order to leverage the scalability and the lower cost by going into partnering into the public cloud. So from our perspective, we look at your data storage like a triangle, where the most sensitive information is at the top of the triangle, and as you go down the triangle, it gets less sensitive, less important, less classified if you're a DoD agency, going to the base of the pyramid, where you have this very large swath of information that, I don't want to say you don't care about it, but it doesn't require the same level of security controls and sensitivity. Maybe this is publicly available information. Maybe this is information that anybody could FOIA and get a hold of anyways. There's many different levels of classification of data. So we look at the data storage arena for an organization as a pyramid, and we try and identify where the right place to set that line is. And you sort of set that bar somewhere along that pyramid. And you say everything above that needs to be kept in the private cloud, private data centers, your internal networks, and things below that line can be put out into the public cloud. And there's a terrific pressure. There's a lot of political and economic pressure to keep that line as high as possible, because it's obviously much more economically feasible going into the public cloud with that lower base of data, and in most cases that will be the majority of your data, maybe an 80-20 type of a split. depending on the type of data that your agency deals with.
Absolutely, great points. Yeah, Paul?
So I was just thinking about cloud a little bit because we're not really a cloud computing, part of the equation, but I was thinking about, well, how are we as a business using cloud computing? And I think it's kind of a couple of cool examples where we've interfaced with government through, quote, cloud, if you will. So when we want to exchange information with government, but we want it to be secured in a way that government wants it secured, it becomes somewhat challenging when I've got to send my very expensive, sales engineer all the way down and pick up a CD-ROM of drawings, for example, of a building that may have certain information that's just sensitive, but it's unclassified. And it just becomes challenging to do that, what we call Nike Net or Sneaker Net, where you got to actually walk down and actually physically get the drawings and pull them off and come back. So we've used cloud a little bit in that exchange of information across secured servers, which has been very helpful to us as a business. And when government interfaces with us in ways like that, we really like it. Another one that I mentioned earlier yesterday is something called BetterBuy that I just became aware of maybe 24 hours ago. When I find new topics that I really, really like and I'm passionate about how they're being used, especially when people are experimenting and trying new things that I think are really effective, I try to broadcast those as loudly as I can. But the idea was GSA engaged industry and put out a blog, so to speak, about the topic of mobility, wireless and mobile mobility, and asked us to comment. Okay, that's good, I guess. I mean, as I mentioned in the very first point, right? I really want to be engaged and I like to talk, so sure, I'll broadcast my thoughts. And so in that regard, blogging really allows for, I want to put an idea out there and let other people comment on it. But I don't want to send an email because it just clogs up the email to go back and forth. And that notion of sort of collaboratively working on an idea, when you think about public or private or really more secured, exists. It absolutely exists. So as you think about, I want to put an idea out there and let people comment on it, but I don't necessarily want all those exchanges to be going through my email. How can I use that? How can I do that? And I think I think it's a great use of how blogs, or in this instance a wiki, right, really creates the consensus around an idea. And if you get lots of people saying, no, that's a really good thing, I like that. Remember, there's no dislike in Facebook, right? It's just I like it or I don't get to comment. So that would be a good thing to kind of introduce in a lot of exchanges, by the way. At our office, right? Like when we throw an idea out there as strategic initiatives, the first 20 comments are always, well, this is why it won't work, this is why it can't work, this is why. So I always implement big circles around the word NO. And I said, even though there's a no, don't be the no in innovation. There's an NO, and I put a big circle around the no, and I said, there's no no's here, okay? So let's just be yes for a while. Let's just explore what yes means, and let's explore what that impact is. Because if the creative energy and the innovation creates better solutions for all of us, better access, it could be that the access to the information greatly and quickly overcomes whatever risk is associated with putting it out there. Just food for thought.
Great. And before we move on from the cloud topic, for the DoD folks in the audience, Joe, on our call, we had discussed your kind of experience in the DoD space, and I was just wondering your thoughts on what it would take for the DoD to embrace commercial cloud platforms, given some of the privacy and security concerns that were just brought up.
Yeah, so again, it goes back to data types. There's going to be some things, if you do put in a virtualized environment with on-demand and burstability, it's still going to be in a private infrastructure. And there's just no argument to say that you want to put that information at risk and you want to put it in a shared infrastructure. So be very cognizant of your kind of data and how important it is to keep that separate. Fine, put it in a cloud virtualized environment, but keep it private. But still go back and look at your other kinds of data, and there are going to be reasons to kind of tip your toes into the cloud infrastructure, and you don't have to do it with all your data all at once. You don't have to do it with your almost classified but not quite classified stuff, put it with almost available, not quite totally available stuff, and give that a try in a public cloud infrastructure. But again, be very, very sensitive to what kind of data you're operating with and what kind of risks you're willing to take with it.
Perfect. Thank you. We're going to shift gears now to talk about mobility and wireless, which is something that has increasingly come up more and more.
Something I know a lot more about.
What he knows a lot about, but it's a topic that I think is going to be, will continue to increase in importance as we move forward with technology, with the new generation of workers, with different expectations of data availability and the concept of an actual office, right? So, Paul, obviously, got a couple questions for you here. First of all, on the water bottles that I see some of us using, I noticed that what does it say? It says wireless is essential. I was wondering what you mean by that and what was the message you're trying to get across?
Okay, so if you didn't get a water bottle, take a water bottle because Javier really doesn't want to slog, 100 water bottles back to DC. So if you didn't get a water bottle, take a water bottle. I'm inviting all the other, private businesses. If you want a water bottle, take a water bottle. But wireless is essential. Okay, so I believe passionately that no business today is getting done without wireless. I believe that it is an essential part of what we're doing. I said 6 months ago that even the folks that were telling us hell no, that it was inevitable that they would be faced with, by some executive asking or telling, not, I don't want to hear no, I want to hear how. I talked to a lot of the DoD folks in the last couple of days. Very interesting. I actually had one admit to me he was a hell no, and that now he says, okay, how? I admit it. I was one of those guys. And I think it's really important for everyone here to understand. This is inevitable. You must learn it and you must face it. 5 years ago, we became the 6th country in the world where our spend on mobility exceeded our spend on wired networks. We were the 6th country in the world in 2006 where that occurred. We're spending a lot of money on mobility, securing it, making it useful, making it a part of our networks. So it is inevitable, it is essential, and if you don't believe me, try to go a day without your cell phone. Okay, how many people have a cell phone? Show of hands. Yeah. How many people have 2? Show of hands. No, you know what? Raise those hands up a little bit higher if you have 2. Okay. How many people have 3?
What?
Okay, now wait. How many people have 2 plus an air card? There you go. Okay, so that's 3. And all of your cell phones are not phones, voice. I'm actually changing the topic tomorrow. We're actually talking about mobile data and voice networks. These are mobile data networks, next generation, LTE. It's all about data. Okay? So you got to get to know it.
Great points. And this next question actually is something that one of the attendees wanted me to ask. So I wrote it down here. It says, can you describe how you are hearing government is reforming access control and safety and why it must begin with defined mobile networks?
I can talk about that in our room. We have a great product that we're demonstrating right now about access, managed access. It's not jamming, it's managed access. And if you'd like to come up and if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to get up. It's really exciting. But we're trying to do next generation things with mobility in terms of access control at the network level rather than at the device level.
Terrific.
Actually, there are some technologies that you're able to define a closed user group within your data devices so that those devices, when they access, quote, the internet, they're not really accessing the internet. The information is getting funneled into your own intranet so that you can hand out your devices. They don't go out to the internet except for through your firewalls if you allow them to, but they interoperate with things that stay within your own data network.
Great point.
And if I can add on as well, I think that this is starting to touch on the virtual desktop initiatives as well, the ability for you to change the argument, and virtual desktops is very important for cloud initiatives. It's very important for virtualization and abstractions like we've been talking about, but it's really a game changer when you talk about personally identifiable information as well. Some people don't make that connection automatically, but when you think about your data at rest cryptography, when you think about all of your headaches around laptops and lost devices and things like that we've been going through for the last 4 or 5 years, when you move to a virtual desktop, all of those headaches go away as well. So it's not just a server side thinking about it from a virtualization perspective. There's a lot of changes that happen at the client side that make your lives and make your policies a lot easier moving to virtual desktops. But that is going to drive more wireless, that is going to drive more mobile devices, because now it doesn't matter whether I get my virtual desktop on my phone or on my home PC or wherever, they all become work devices enabled by wireless networking. So you've got to shift that argument from data at rest cryptography to access control and authentication mechanisms over ubiquitous networking and wireless environments.
Terrific. I'm going to shift gears here again and talk about government-industry collaboration. Steve, you had mentioned earlier in response to the question about the role of the CIO that the role is changing to become more of a portfolio manager, and we know that point 16 really talks about removing barriers for small innovative companies rather, to get in front of the IT community and have access to really make change. I was wondering, based on your experience in the security area specifically, what are your experiences in that, and how should the public sector proceed to really make that happen?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the government needs to make, smart investments, kind of stating the obvious, but certainly with the financial situation now and in the future, it's going to be critical that, you guys are making smart investments in technology. And I like the plan because it does note, hey, don't always, buy the big guy, look at the small innovative companies. They are working hard to make sure there's an ROI attached to that. I think the old adage of, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, it really doesn't apply anymore. Because if you're a CIO or you're in an IT organization, you have a big project fail, that's going to leave a big black eye, especially with the little money that you have to spend now. So, speaking from a security perspective, I think that just from an overall technology perspective, I think that investing in more proactive technologies, look at all in the traditional security sense from an antivirus perspective and host-based intrusion prevention, those types of things. Look at how many cycles in the IT organization are consumed with chasing around those things and false positives, or an event happens and trying to figure out what's going on. I would encourage you to take a serious look at technologies that are really that are proactive in nature. Like I talked about the application whitelisting, understanding what's in your environment, listing those applications out and saying, you know what, this is what's going to operate in my environment, and not everything else is denied by default. So what you're doing there is you're saying, I don't care what the next zero-day threat is. I don't necessarily care too much. It gives me some more room to do patch management and so forth. So I think it's important that you're looking at technologies that are innovative and that are proactive in it, whether it's us or somebody else. I think it saves a ton of cycles in the IT arena and frees up that time so they can go out and work on their real jobs and try to meet the mission of their particular department or agency.
Absolutely. That's great. It's one thing we at GTRA like to do. We really like to have a mix of larger companies and the smaller innovative ones. So I think it's an important point to make. Do you have a comment?
Just real quick. We're a small business as well, and so, but we've raised, we're in our fourth round of institutional money. We raised $120 million last year. Terrific, good for us. But we're so small compared to a lot of the other players in our space that oftentimes it's hard, unless you got a real loudmouth like me, to be heard. Okay, so there's reasons why they hire guys like me with a lot of energy to try to draw attention to us, because we do think we're doing things that are consistent with strategic plans of very large organizations right now, both wireless service providers and the government. It's hard in a business like ours that's really commercially oriented toward a different customer than the government to get people's attention on government. And so it's important that you understand that you're beginning to become maybe not the most important customer all the time. I mean, I think companies like Google and other things, Apple, coming out with devices that are propagating worldwide so quickly that really the voice of government saying this is the way it has to be doesn't get heard quite as loudly. And so I think what government's response to that has been, which is interesting, is, okay, how do we use these commercial off-the-shelf devices to try to get our business done more efficiently, like some of these companies that are out there doing it? And I think that's really a great way for government to think about how to use industry differently. Find out how we're doing things, or see how these companies are innovating, and try those things yourselves and see if they fit. If they don't, that's okay. You know, it doesn't have to change everything. You don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing. But I think there are opportunities with small businesses to try and creatively get to a customized solution that you're looking for that still fits in the overall platform and the architecture of what you're trying to accomplish.
Terrific. We have two more questions that I have before we can open it up to some questions from the audience. The next one is about security, and it really relates to one of the points where it talks about using light technology through the cloud first policy. And Joe, I was wondering, we kind of talked about cloud security before, but do you think that the right security even exists to allow this to happen?
Yeah, so there's a lot of dimensions to security, right? I mean, there's the right processes, there's doing logging, there's audits, there's incidents management, and separation. And to me, separation is a foundation piece. And again, you go back, look at your data. Not everything, you're not going to trust all your data to all kinds of separation technologies. But I do think that over time we'll recognize that we'll build confidence in some of these separation technologies that are out there for the compute infrastructure, again, analogous to the way we've trusted some of those separation technologies in the networking infrastructure.
Awesome. Great, and last up is another huge topic that a lot of folks were interested in, both in the boardroom meetings and some of the sessions, which is consolidation. So Roy, Vivek recommends promoting the use of green IT within data centers. I was wondering, are there any ways to extend power consumption controls beyond data centers to clients? Anything?
Well, that's one of the things in the 25 initiatives 25-point reform that I really liked was the inclusion of an understanding of the power consequences. I think too often we've separated the responsibility and, if you'll excuse the pun, the power of who's in control of paying the power bill at the end of the day. A lot of times it falls on facilities or utilities, sort of a different part of the organization rather than IT. Whereas from a data center consolidation perspective, from a desktop power management perspective, there's a lot of things that IT organizations can do today to help control those power bills, but there's no way for them to recognize sort of the ROI windfall of that investment and of that initiative. So I really liked the fact that I really liked the fact that we were addressing that at the data center consolidation level, because it's beginning to break down that barrier between who's paying for the power and who's using the power. And the more that we can break that barrier down, I think the more innovation that you'll see at the desktop level. Because right now, we have desktop solutions that we've implemented where people have gotten a return on investment in less than 6 months. So they roll out new software technology to all of those desktops and all of those servers that are being inefficiently managed from a power consumption perspective. And within 6 months, their power bills have decreased to the point where they've made back all the money that they spent on that initiative, and that's a way to get some extra headroom in your budget, especially under times of continuing resolution. Then you've got that extra money that you could put towards other initiatives. The problem is if the money's in the wrong bucket and there's no visibility between the people that are paying the power bills and the people that are managing the IT infrastructure, then it becomes very difficult to make that ROI, and it just appears as a cost line item from the IT perspective. So I was really glad to see that in the 25 points.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that there's a lot of innovation going on out there around agent-based power management, even beyond the data center, and I'm glad to see those walls breaking down.
Absolutely. Any comments on that?
Well, this is looking a little bit further out, but Yes, virtualization helps you use your hardware more efficiently, and yes, hardware is getting cheaper, but it actually is the infrastructure of running a data center that ends up being where the cost efficiencies come in. But let's look out a little bit, and let's go, some people want to say, I want to know where my data is. Okay, it stays in the United States, I got that. But if we can get past that and say, I don't really care in the United States it is, and if we're allowed to move it around and run it near where there's hydroelectric plants when there's a lot of water running, or near where the windmills are when there's a lot of wind blowing, we're able to take advantage of, we're moving the processes and the data to where the power resources are, as opposed to trying to build power resources where the processing data centers are. And when you get truly into service orchestration and taking advantage and balancing all those resources, it's going to be where the power is going to be one of those resources that we end up trying to balance.
It's like finding the cheapest gas station.
Impossible these days, right? Great. I think with that, I want to open it up and see if there's any questions from the audience on any of the comments that were made or anything not discussed.
I had an additional comment that I wanted to make. A lot of this cloud initiative is being driven by some trends that are happening in the marketplace. When you look at the cost of power, when you look at, and I wish I had a PowerPoint presentation with a bunch of graph slides, I don't right now, but think about the trend lines within your own organization, the power management trend lines, the security, the cost of networking, right? As networking costs go down and we're able to send bits faster, cheaper, further, then the cost of computing becomes the driving factor, as you were getting to in your last statement. So maybe 10 years ago, the cost of networking was too expensive to pay to push those bits all the way to where the hydroelectric dam is. But now, as the cost of networking has decreased and the cost of storage has increased, and the power management it takes to control the vast amounts of storage that we have in our infrastructures growing and growing and growing on us, it becomes more important for us to put that storage and that accessibility and that processing power close to the power points at the centralized cloud facilities, as he was just saying, and cheaper then to access that over the networks. And it's interesting to me when I look at it from a trend analysis perspective, and that may help you identify internally which projects you have that would be the best candidates for doing perhaps some cloud work or moving off to a public cloud, based on those trend lines of where are your real costs. Is it more costly for me to store this data than it is for me to access this data? And that might be a key area, a key sign to this is in addition to the security concerns we mentioned earlier, but this is a key piece of technology. Maybe that wants to be the first thing that we're going to outsource to the public cloud.
Terrific. Great closing thought. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time. Panelists, thank you very much.